I'm Edric,
I'm Joy.
and we're here to help you.
Get it right from the start.
So, it's been emotional. If you've been following the first two parts of this, we call it now a mini series with our son Elijah, and we'll close with this last episode where, our hearts are really to help give you as much as we can from what we're learning so far. We were honest in sharing. We haven't figured it all out, but we've learned a couple of things. And so we want to share this to you all to help you get it right from the start. So let's jump straight into this. The difference of this particular episode is, go ahead, babe.
Yeah, because we talked about in the first the grit, right? The perseverance that we need to instill in our children and how that develops in them. And then the second one we talked about the importance of internal motivation
Versus external.
versus
Yeah.
external, and really wanting to do your best and be excellent because you want to glorify God, right? And you're accountable to God. And so this third one is related to the second one because you can't have morality and purity without wanting to please God in your innermost person. And Elijah, you've been away, as we've said several times in the previous podcasts, and we're not micromanaging what you do, what you watch, what you listen to, what you expose yourself to, even the friends that you have. We've met a couple of them. They're great guys. We don't know everyone that you're with. And my question to you is, how do you safeguard your purity and your morality when you are in a culture that is very liberal about morality and doesn't value purity anymore?
Yeah, for those catching up, he's been in the US, right? So that's what Joy's saying, versus Philippines, which arguably can be more conservative.
So, in terms of that specific context, I would qualify it with it is a lot easier to be on campus with a lot of Christian friends in a Christian environment where you're required to go to chapel 5 days a week, and they don't let you go to church on campus. You can't be complacent. You've got to find a church yourself. You're not allowed to drink. You're not allowed to stay out past 1 a.m. All these things, very very safe environment in terms of that. Of course, if you keep them and if you're honest with yourself and with the faculty and the establishment. So the rails are there in place. And it's weird. It's almost a kind of freedom, because freedom is ultimately freedom from being constrained by desires. And if you have the freedom to be good, that is the best kind of freedom, because if you want it, you're truly free. If you don't want it, then it's arguable.
You find ways.
But yeah, if you don't want it, you find ways. You'll still find a way to be free. But in this environment, I thank God for it, because it has been, despite all its imperfections as well, a place where that can happen. But how do you create that? How do you create an environment like that lasts even when there are no safeguards in place? When I go out, when I visit other people.
Or I'm talking about even the very basic way that a lot of men struggle, which is with pornography, right?
Because online, it's private.
That has nothing
School
to
won't
do
even
with
see that.
the guardrails.
I mean, they can put blockers on their internet and stuff.
But you can hack and you can find ways.
But yes, there are ways. I think one thing that it goes back to is the habits of the heart that are trained to be right from the start. And so one thing that gets us as human beings, and one thing that I've fallen prey to, is why not just, throw yourself into the challenges and the temptations and let yourself be there, because that makes you stronger, right? Like, it is more noble and virtuous to slay the dragon rather than to flee the dragon and to not let any of your people you love get hurt. But at the same time, that's where our pride can take us captive and allow us to fall. If Eve hadn't even gone for the temptation, hadn't gone close to it, then she might have been in a different place. If Adam hadn't allowed her to be on her own, and he might have been in a different place, and so on. And I think that's why the Lord's Prayer, if you go back to that, says, "Do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil." I think when it comes to things like temptation, where sin is so much more powerful than our own wills can be, one of the best ways to train up families, train up children, and the ways that I've seen dad do it specifically, because he's the man and I'm accountable to him for those things more so than mom, just because it's a boy thing. Although mom does love to help, and I'll give her that. The discipline and the habit of fleeing temptation is really critical. To have that knee-jerk reaction of, I'm just going to flee this. I'm not even going to tempt myself. I'm not going to let myself go close to it. And so however I can do that, putting things on my phone to block it, make it harder to use the internet, using the school Wi-Fi without any VPNs or torrent networks to try and bypass it, just as a default mode. So I don't even have to think about it. So I don't stumble across these things by accident, because there's so many places and dark holes that you can get into on the internet, and it's a self-reinforcing cycle if you do fall into it. And so I think it's a helpful first layer of thinking about how to develop the discipline of purity, the discipline to ask the Lord, do not lead me into temptation, but deliver me from evil. I don't want to even go near the temptation. But when the temptation comes, I guess that's the next question. How do you deal with it? Yeah.
So how do you deal with it?
When temptations come, because they will, inevitably, what's been really helpful for me is having accountability, not just with my dad, with my brothers here, but also with people there. Finding mentors that I can go to who have said, if you ever feel the temptation at any time, text me. I'll be there for you. To be connected to a local church, a group of men who will keep me accountable. One of the greatest blessings this last semester was being able to go with the men of my church to a men's retreat. And what did we talk about at that men's retreat? This exact same topic. And I didn't realize, men from all ages as well were there, and we're there to support and to be accountable to in that church. So that was really helpful. And so having multiple support networks, because it is not good for man to be alone, is really helpful for when the temptation comes. And then to be vigilant in spiritual disciplines is the last thing. There's nothing really that replaces the grit required to be vigilant in spiritual disciplines. The things that God gives to us in his word, the things that you fill your mind with on a constant basis, will shape the pathways that your thoughts take and the routes and the destinations that you end up in. Following the spirit of that prayer, deliver us from evil. Yeah.
So, a large part of our conversation, and if we're honest, when I think about even our line, get it right from the start, we have this perception of we want to help parents who are starting out in their journey so that they don't make the same mistakes that we maybe have committed and many other people. But the reality is many people who are listening and maybe even watching this have messed up or have kids who have struggled in very deep ways with immorality or impurity. So I'd love to get your thoughts, son, on, and you've had friends like this who you journeyed with also. How do you course correct? What are the practical ways or the things that you've seen that have helped young people or even parents move from the point of they've been broken, they've experienced all these things and experienced victory? What have you seen?
Well, one of the things that makes this particular sin for men so powerful is that it is not a new desire. It is not something that is foreign to our nature. And just like everything else the enemy uses, he just twists something that is good by very little and makes it into something that can be so evil
It's very good.
and so dangerous.
It's very good.
And that there's things that we like in life, food that are healthy. The desire for intimacy is one of those things. And it is so good and so pure and so righteous when it is in the right context, that it is so, for the same reasons that it is that way, it is also so evil when it is perverted and so powerful, because it's the virtue of love that is being perverted. And so the only way to really overcome that kind of a perversion is to replace it with a greater love. When I've seen my friends or people that I'm trying to help with this struggle, try and get out of this, the only way for them to get out of it, practically, there's many different tricks that you can do to keep yourself from leading yourself into temptation or falling into temptation accidentally. But to really overcome the perversion of love, you need a true
addiction.
version. And the addiction is to have a true version of love. And that can only come through, ultimately, healthy relationships with people. Yes, absolutely. But also a healthy relationship with God. One where the love is so overpowering that it overcomes that lust. That's the only way. And by being close to God, by being daily near with God, that's where the spiritual disciplines come in. You develop that love because we love what we behold regularly. Just like the same thing with lust, actually. If you behold it regularly, you become more and more drawn to it. And if we behold God, he is in the same way, but to a far, far greater degree. The more we behold him, the more we become like him, and the more we become like him, the more we love him. And so that's kind of one thing that we were talking about earlier, the ordering of your loves, the ordering of your desires. When you're able to order your desires such that the desire for God is at the very top, then all the other things, the natural things, the good things, fall into their good, righteous, holy, and proper places.
How do you think you're able to do that? Or for you, how do you think that was done for you, that you were able to order the loves and really say, okay, God, I'm going to make you my love so that all these other things won't pull or draw me away and therefore cause me to sin. Or if I've already done that, I can reset it and go back.
Yeah. So I think it's the virtuous cycle of obedience at some level, like from an abstract level, because I love abstraction. If you're obedient, if you love me, you will keep my commandments, says Jesus. So if you obey him, you are loving him. That's how you practically love God. But I mean, from a practical perspective, you're like, how do I obey and then love so that I can obey? Like, I just want to obey. I want to get that first. But it's obeying him in all the other things and all the small things in life and living that consistent life where virtue starts to build up your love for the good things, for the holy things. And then, practically, I guess, in the family, because that's the context of this, one thing that's really, really important that I've been able to see is how the love for God is practically lived out in someone's life. When our parents tell us, we love you, they can say that, but there's something that they've always asked us that's been really weird. Like, how do you know we love you? And I've always, like made up something to answer that question, but it's hard to
be a joke
pin
here.
down what exactly it is. It's a life lived out fully. In the same way, how do we know our parents love God? It has to be in their obedience, in their sincerity, in their genuineness, in their constant repentance and confession that we see in their lives. And when we see that lived out and the fruit and the joy of that, because God says that the obedient will be rewarded, the obedient will be rewarded even in this life, the righteous will see the fruit of his labor. The joy of obedience becomes real to the whole family. And when you start to love that, you start to internalize that love for yourself. It becomes something that, I want that too. I want to have a relationship with God that looks like that. I want to experience that love for myself. And that becomes the overriding, all-inflaming, all-encompassing love.
Thanks, Elijah.
I have a question.
Go ahead. I want to add something. This is getting really juicy. So you go, I'll go.
Okay. So Elijah, on a very practical level, you know that kids today get exposed to pornography, sensuality at very young ages. Are there things that you believe or you've experienced that parents can do to also create an environment that is more conducive, I would say, to making the right choices?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. The most simple, super basic, practical example of this is kids are given so many devices today, so many ways through which to access the internet that they can hold in the palm of their hands, that they're taking with them, that are portals to the pit of hell. Like, it's so bad.
Portals to the pit of hell. You know,
They
this is
can be.
what
they can be
happens when you get an
portals.
education like
You get to the gates of heaven or the pit of the abyss, and you can choose. It's like your own adventure. Kids get these things in their pockets when they're 10, 11, 12 years old, in
Earlier.
preschool,
Yeah.
in infancy, and what dictates what they see, what they'll love. Reinforcement learning algorithms on somebody's servers somewhere that were designed to make the most possible revenue out of ads. Like, this is insane. Why are we letting ourselves into this world so easily, and we're just giving our kids over to the gods of the reinforcement algorithms? I think that is really, really sad. And so how you help mitigate that is not that complicated. It's a lot harder to do than to say. It's just like cut down on the devices.
Yeah.
And then make environments where you can be with them to engage in devices and get their guards up early. Like, my dad got my guard up early. Even before I hit puberty, he was like, son, this is what it means. This is what is good. This is what is not good. And when you see this one, you turn off your device, you run away, you tell dad immediately. And it was just that discipline. He didn't tell us that once in like a side conversation where he was really nervous. He was like, all right, son, I'm going to do the talk. And then he was like, okay, I never have to do it again. He would tell it to us day after day, week after week. He's like, son, have your guard up, flee from temptation. And that kind of parenting is so critical if we're aware of the battlefield that we're actually living in.
All right, thanks.
And
I'm going to jump in now really quick,
Okay.
super quick, because this is really good. I actually don't remember those things that Elijah said vaguely, but I'm grateful that it has made a difference. I think what has also been helpful for us and what we've been encouraging parents to do also is, if we want them on a practical note to build this sense of true and good morality and purity and avoid the other stuff, whether you are currently seeing your kids struggle or not, is what's called a 360-degree audit, right? So what does that mean? I think for many parents who have been going about the journey, they fail to stop and see the influences on their children's lives. And right now, there's so many because of what Elijah mentioned, different portals, et cetera, et
it's
cetera.
also the friends, right? It's
Exactly. So 360 means you want to ask yourself a very honest and a practical question. What are the influences of your kids right now? And if you don't even know that, then that's step one. You need to be able to know that. So practical things like, what music are they listening to? What are they watching? Who are their friends? Both those that you know and maybe those that you don't even know. If they're in school, it might
Online
be
friends too, yeah.
online friends. It might even be more complex if they're in school because you don't know them, versus homeschool, we can be more involved. So you really want to ask those questions. What are the influences in your child's life, so that as you do, you can be very practical in addressing, where did this thought come from? And we've heard stories like that, right? Even good, well-meaning Christian families who are like, where did my kid learn to say those things? Where did they get this construct? So that is one very practical thing that I wanted to just add to the conversation, a 360 audit.
Yeah.
And when you're able to do that, you're able to see better.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that, maybe with our younger kids, because they got access to gadgets actually earlier than our sons did, which is actually unfortunate, but we're
having a conversation about that, my wife and I, still up to now.
yeah, and we're trying to backtrack
Yes.
that now, and I think it's been better. But there was a point where our daughters were listening to music that I felt like, are they really listening to the lyrics of these songs, or are they just kind of because their friends are listening to it, or it's what's popular, and so they're interested in it? So I had to have a conversation with our daughters. Even I said, sweethearts, have you stopped to really listen to the lyrics, and what values are these songs teaching you? What's the messaging? Because at the end of the day, I don't want to be going around and telling my kids, you can't listen to this, you can't listen to that, that's not a good song. I want them to develop for themselves that conviction, because purity at the end of the day, it comes from conviction, right? And I want them to ask themselves, okay, is this a good song to listen to? Is it wholesome? Is it Philippians 4 verse 8? Whatever is good, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, you meditate on these things. Or is it promoting and exposing me to values, to perspectives that are sensual, that it's awakening romance too early, these kinds of things. And so I think I praise God the girls have been much better because we actually don't tell our kids you can't watch non-Christian movies. You can't listen to non-Christian music.
Yeah.
You know, we don't
Thanks for
wanna
calling that out.
we don't want to be legalistic, right? Because I think that leads to rebellion eventually when it's just all external. But we do ask them to be discerning and to be mindful of what they watch, of what they listen to.
Right.
And from time to time, we do check,
And
right?
and it depends on the age too, right? The amount of
good,
discernment and discretion you give them.
Obviously.
Like to
That's
very
Kaylee is going
That's
to be
very good.
Tiana from Titan.
That's very good.
Me.
That's very good.
Yeah.
And I just want to echo two really quick things to what Joy and Elijah just said right now. It's so important that as early as you can, when they're able to make choices already, and you see that they own these decisions, because the more it seems like you are forcing them to do it, the more it becomes artificial, right? As Joy was calling out. So these
Especially as they
choices,
get older.
yeah, these choices to stay away from all those influences, which I talked a little bit about. On the one hand, you're checking it, but on the other, if you want to successfully get them out of it, they need to be able to own these decisions and say, you know what, this is why I shouldn't choose it, because it can lead to all these things, which you were saying, right? And there are consequences. And as Elijah even articulated in our past podcast, there's a deeper motivation that drives them to say, I don't want to do this. The last thing I wanted to say is on that note, right? On the one hand, they own it. On the other, there's no shortcuts, or there's nothing that can replace the pleasures that they might be experiencing from these things that are immoral and impure versus the pleasure and the joy of what you can create with them as a family. I think it's very important that as parents, we're able to think through what are the things we can do if they're not going to get into these things. What else can they experience as joyful and pleasurable as a family? So think about those things. For us, we've discovered board games and all these things, because in this journey of staying pure, if they see that the choices that would lead them to impurity can be countered with other things that are even more fun, even more joyful than these things, then they will start wanting and channeling their energies and thoughts there.
And I think besides the fact that children can get exposed to these things accidentally, which is important, right? We need to have our conversation with our kids, where we talk to them about this is, don't allow people to touch you in a certain way, and be mindful of your body and your private parts. And, there's such a thing as sexual abuse. And we've had these conversations with
early on.
But I think we've also emphasized how beautiful marriage is and why,
as Elijah articulated, right?
yes, why the context of where you experience sexual intimacy is so beautiful. Because if we're not also emphasizing that, and we're just saying, this is wrong, this is bad, sex outside of marriage is bad, but not also talking about how God made it to be so beautiful,
amazing,
and so amazing, so they have something to look forward to, then it's like we create this deficit in their minds where maybe I'm missing out on something, versus there's something amazing to look forward to. And so I think it's that twofold thing, right? We don't want to create this deficit where they feel like I'm missing out. My friends are experiencing these things and I'm not experiencing it. Maybe I should try it. Versus I want so badly to experience what is good and right and beautiful and true in marriage that I'm going to safeguard
that's good.
my life and be careful and be mindful of my choices because I want to experience that. I don't want a corrupted version of that. And I was so encouraged because recently there was a girl and a guy who just got married, and in this day and age, to see like a couple who've never kissed and it was their first time to kiss on their wedding day, and they really stayed pure, and they're both attractive people. And I was so blessed to hear of that story from my brother who officiated that wedding. But it's possible. And I think that purity is possible should be a mantra that we encourage our kids to have, even though they're bombarded with so much sensual content and exposed to so much. But it's also something we must practice as a family. Like, we can't expect our children to be pure and to desire pure things if we ourselves are not mindful of what we watch and what we expose ourselves to, if we're not also creating standards for ourselves. Because just because you're married doesn't mean that you don't struggle with purity, right? And so it's a struggle that everybody has, but it's a struggle that we can all collectively, overcome together as a family even, and journey together by keeping each other accountable.
That's good. And I think we've talked about this in even other podcast episodes, right? So since we have you as our guest, son, any parting thoughts as we wind down on purity, morality?
Absolutely. I think you guys put it really, really well. The one thing that just ties it together in my mind is you can never eliminate these desires, but you can replace them and indeed fulfill them, even in whatever stage of life your kids are. And I think what they find online is what parents can often provide. They find a cheap sense of fulfillment, a cheap sense of pleasure, desire. And that's true for all of us as human beings. And so the idea is not just to run away from something, but to run towards something, to run towards the full life that we can experience in Christ. Because we sometimes ask ourselves, does God really want me to be happy? And the answer is, if you are in Christ, the answer is absolutely yes, resounding yes. And it's not going to be the way that you think it is, but it is the way that He has prescribed for you. And the goal of the family is to make that life as attractive as possible and to live it out. If the parents are living out a life that's attractive, and the kids will be attracted to that. So, yeah.
Thank you, son. Again, I have just learned from listening to our son. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Our desire is once again to help give as much value to wherever you guys are right now. So again, I'm Edric.
I'm Joy.
And we're here to help you
Get it right from the start.